It is 4:30 on Monday, September 11th, and I call this meeting of the Clear Creek Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present and that this meeting has been duly called, that its notice has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. The first item on the agenda is community input, and I don't believe we have any community input today. And the next item is district update, and that information is actually going to be presented further down in our agenda, so we are going to pass over that. But before going to our consent agenda, we're going to go into closed session. So at 4:31, the board will now move to closed session as authorized by the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Section 551.001 concerning purposes permitted by the Act, including 551.071 consultation with attorney.
Mr. President, so I don't see closed session listed on the agenda.
At the very bottom of our printed agenda, it shows that we have the ability to go into closed session during any of our meetings, and so we've made sure that we include that as part of our meeting practice.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to be sure we were covered on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bone. 4:56, and I call us back into open session. The next item on the agenda is consent agenda.
Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
I
Bowen.
move that we accept the monthly Human Resources Board report.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting the consent agenda item as presented, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Bowen. Item B, consider approval of ILA by-board contract and replacement of water damage gym floor at Westbrook Intermediate School.
Good evening. We had reported this a couple of weeks ago where we had some unknown source infiltration under the gym floor, the practice gym floor at Westbrook Intermediate School. We were called out by the principal, and there was considerable buckling and cupping of the gym floor. We did note the water around the perimeter and in various locations. Alex and Ed kind of walked through the building and looked at where the moisture was. It was widespread across the floor. We did submit some information about declaring it an emergency and having Dr. Engel approve us to move forward with the demo of that, which we did issue a purchase order. It was approximately $27,500. This is the actual putback of the floor using an ILA buy-board vendor, both of which would be funded through capital and contingency. And the dollar value of this is $95,100 from the contractor, but we added a $24,900 contingency just in case when we start pulling that up, we may need to do some additional treatment with the contractor and additional acclimation. So we've asking for a contract value of $120,000 to be funded out of capital and contingency.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe.
So now that you've demoed the gym floor, have you found the source of the water incursion?
We haven't demoed it yet. We contracted with them to demo it. They had to go through fingerprinting and background checks, and because we're going to have to do it during the day, and it will take several weeks to demo and remove that material because we can't leave it out because it's an active campus. Once we do, we're going to dig in and see where we can find that water's coming from.
Okay.
There's quite a few sources around there that are suspect that we need to dig into, including exterior, which it hadn't rained in weeks and weeks, and it was unlikely to be a water infiltration from outside.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Can you remind me, is this the gym floor that we replaced recently as well, Westbrook?
Did we, it was the part of the roof? Hurricane.
But it happens to be this particular gym. Okay. Seeing no other questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President,
Sure.
I move that we approve the ILA by-board contract for replacement of a water damaged gym floor at Westbrook Intermediate.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, if you'll please raise your hand. Thank you. It passes unanimous. Next item on the agenda is consider approval of the use of capital project funds for critical infrastructure projects.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to turn that over to Mr. Miller. We kind of given an update on support services from the beginning of the year, as well as then sharing some specific needs.
Thank you, Dr. Engel. It has been an interesting year, to be sure, as we've all experienced with the summer as hot as it's been. I did want to provide a quick update on the start of school for all of the support services departments, including child nutrition, facility services, maintenance and operations, safe and secure school, and transportation. We will start. We'll start with the first three, which were relatively smooth openings. And so starting with child nutrition, we did note that the IP days that we moved to the front of the school year were very much more effective and efficient for our staff. They were able to get a lot more training done. and really get prepped for the new year as opposed to using IP days throughout the year. So that was a great change we made this year. We had a good start even at Ross and Whitman for the kitchen and getting those meals served over there. Our meals served are currently for the first 3 weeks are 5.9% more than they were for the same 3-week period last year. And this is in spite of approximately 50 kitchen worker vacancies in child nutrition department. So we're really satisfied with how the opening went, and our team has been working really hard in child nutrition. Facility services, Ross Elementary opened on Monday, the first day of the transition day. However, Whitcomb opened on Wednesday. We did need some more time for some disruption that we had from some utility, sanitary sewer issues that we had out there. Clear Springs High School, Lake City Intermediate, and Space Center Intermediate, and Victory Lakes Intermediate Mechanical. We were able to get that work done right as teachers were returning to make sure that those systems were up and running. And then the chillers themselves, as you might recall, are over a year lead time, which were ordered this past spring. And we did all of the mechanical work, piping and cooling towers this past summer. And we'll follow up when the chillers arrive and pipe them in. Safe and secure schools, again, IP days were much more effective for our crossing guards and security support staff. It was a relatively quiet start to the school year. We're going to knock on wood on that one. Door and gate checks are ongoing as we've been doing from last year. In every case, we're getting those documented. And we started out with no crossing guard vacancies, and then we had 3 crossing guard vacancies, but we're happy to report that we are back to no crossing guard vacancies at this time. We will jump over to, so I've titled this "It's Been Hot" because our teams have been working really hard. We've had a lot of great things happen, but this prolonged and intense heat wave has really had a significant effect on our aging equipment, specifically HVAC equipment. We've had numerous breakdowns and ongoing issues that our maintenance staff have been working continuously, late nights, early mornings, trying to track what's happening. Weekends, as we're prepping for the first of the school year, we're all meeting and working hard on that, and they continue to work hard on that. We have had also some disruption from COVID. A couple of guys that we've lost over the last week that have come back. Some of them have come back. A few of them are expected to come back in the coming days. It is these hot spots and these air conditioning issues is a significant impact on staff and students. We've received a lot of feedback from the community and our campus staff. We do know that it's significant, and we're working hard to resolve those issues. But it has been rather overwhelming for the team to keep up with what we're seeing. Just a quick bullet at the end there. We still are at 24 custodial vacancies at this time. Transportation. This was really important. The IP days being more effective. I think with transportation, more so than almost everybody, the impact of being able to drive those routes and have more time to really do some training has been very beneficial for them. We have seen buses clearing within 10 minutes of our historical average after 6 weeks. So typically it's about 5:15 average after 6 weeks of school, and we're currently 10 minutes from there. So I think, considering what we've had to deal with, I think that's pretty good. We do have 17 general education bus driver vacancies, 11 sped driver vacancies, and 6 mechanic-based vacancies, which is having an impact on us. Our administrative staff that have CDLs are driving for, in some cases, 8 hours a day, and then coming back and doing what they need to do for route modifications, and really they've been working really hard. Again, the intense and prolonged heat wave has impacted our aging buses. We've got a pretty significant number of buses that do not have working air conditioning. I think it's 31 route and 34 trip buses. And we are working hard to minimize the impact. Those are active routes. So if there is a We've got bus drivers and students that are on buses. As you know, the temperatures have approached even 107 degrees a couple of weeks ago. We've had some really, really hot days, and we're continuing to drive. We have some things that we've done over in transportation, including So including coolers and ice and water provided to drivers. In our maintenance department, I'll kick back over there. So it's really chillers, cooling towers versus air handlers and classroom units. So one of the things we do in our maintenance department really focuses on this is if a chiller or a cooling tower goes down, it means the whole school's down. So it's going to take the priority. And then if an air handler goes down, it could be an entire classroom wing. So that one's going to be the next level or tier of importance. Then you get down to classrooms, which definitely affects classrooms, but in terms of trying to triage and do the prioritization, that's what they've historically done. Our tech work hours have been significant. Campus start and run times have been adjusted. We're turning buildings on, in some cases, the day before. Most cases, 3 a.m. and monitoring those. Our guys get in at 4 in the morning and start watching some of those, looking for hot spots, looking for things that may have tripped. These older units, they trip. A lot of times they trip repeatedly, so we're having to manage those. We did rent quite a few spot coolers to place those in classrooms, but they're minimally effective. They'll keep it from getting really hot, but they're also noisy, so there's a direct impact on instruction. We have been utilizing contractor support through the last few weeks to really help us to repair those items. In transportation, a week before, 2 weeks ago, I believe, we changed our focus to only include for our mechanics critical repairs and air conditioning repairs, and worked over the weekend. We got some fixed. I think we got 18 fixed, and then the next week, Monday and Tuesday, we had 23 additional failures. So it was sort of like we're working hard, but we're losing ground, and looking at those at the age of those buses really helps us to understand where those are. This is where I was mentioning we have provided coolers, ice, and water. We also brought over, Franklin gave us some rags from the, graduation. We put those in coolers, gave them to the bus drivers so they could wear them. We were handing out water to students. I know a lot of our bus drivers are letting students know to bring water with them to hopefully lessen the impact, but I want to reiterate it. It's a significant impact on staff, students for all of these issues. And as I mentioned, we do have some COVID running through some of our driver population as well. So far, we've been able to cover that with our administrative staff, relief drivers, and some retirees. I wanted to give a little bit of history. So in 2017, we had a bond election, and included in that was priority 1 items and then major projects. So back then we had priority 1 for a life cycle basis was between expected failure between 1 and 2 years, and priority 2 was expected failure between 3 and 5 years. But they were mixed. We didn't have separate types of priorities. So you had other 2s that were much larger that weren't really life cycle based. We did recognize that as we went into planning for this one, and we changed to have life cycle separate from an architectural or condition, because we really need to make sure that we get the 5 years worth of these life cycles replaced, which includes our air conditioners, our buses, all of those items that have life cycle, and they are definitely going to go down if they are too old. So what that means for us is that many items that were included in the original assessment from 17 were projected to fail or reach the end of their life cycle by 2020 and 21 and 22. And we presented that information as part of definitely priority 1 this time for its life cycle. And that information was presented at the work session in August of 22. And then in the fall of 22, based on y'all's request, you asked for critical infrastructure items that are expected to fail in the next 18 months. And so a lot of these items that we're experiencing now were part of those lists, and we're starting to really see the impact of that. And then in spring through the summer of 23, we had the facility advisory committee process. We did start our HVAC critical projects, and we did order buses last November. Those are still not in. We did have a few come in, but they're projected to start rolling in a little more, a little faster in October. Then in August 2023, the board approved a Vader and bond election to be called in November. So we're expecting that to happen. As I've reported several times over the last year, the impact and frequency of system and equipment failures will accelerate the farther along we get, and we are experiencing that now. Parts availability continues to decline, and lead times have not really improved on some of these heavier equipment items for buses. So based on the impact on the school, more is needed. We know that the impact is significant, and that our guys and our gals are working really hard to try to resolve these issues. But in many cases, there's not much of a good resolution to this. But the impact on the campus and the students, it remains. So more really is needed to try to address these issues. So I've broken out into a near-term response and a long-term response. We're going to activate or implement a disaster response protocol like we would use for a hurricane, where we're really laying it all out there and documenting and tracking with some of our finance management staff we've gone through several hurricanes, and we've done this before to really keep track of what's happening out there, just to make sure that we're doing everything we can to not only identify but also track the completion of those items and recurrence of those items. So we did meet today to start that process, and really worked with Ed and his team and Alex and his team to really start laying out what the terminology will be and what we think would be the highest priority. Facility services, we would like to have them relieve pressure on maintenance for contractor repairs, which will help us with some of the smaller, lower tier items that are continuing to happen for the same rooms in some cases, where you could have the same room hot for days at a time. But if we're dealing with chillers that are down and we've got the whole schools, they're going to naturally focus on those items. So this will hopefully allow us to take that load off of maintenance, so that they can focus in on those items that are recurring. Looking at capital and contingency funding, since many of these repairs are just to get us through until a bond replaces them and allows us to purchase them, and that could be up to 14 months after an election. So we're working on that. We are going to advise campuses more often on relocation. If we really don't think we can repair something and spot coolers are not going to cut it, then we'll advise them they may need to think about relocating to either another classroom, a science lab, or something that might be available. Not always going to be available. So we're working on that, but ultimately leave it up to the principal to make that call. We are going to continue to reevaluate bus routes and timing, especially those related to buses without air, to make sure we're keeping those route lengths to a minimum. Of course, you've got multiple tiers, so one for an elementary route might be short, but an intermediate may be a long route. So trying to keep those things as close as possible is what our goal is, and to continue to provide those additional resources. Looking at a long-term response, we're going to recommend for the board in September to do a reimbursement resolution to allow us to order these big pieces of equipment like chillers, cooling towers, prior to an election. That does mean that if it does not pass, then we would have to fund those out of capital. So we have to be very, very particular and careful about that, because we don't want to deplete the capital contingency too quickly. So, but it would help to have 5 weeks, 6 weeks of pullback of a lead time on that, even though it's still 12 months out. It would help us with that. That's something we'd like you to consider at a future future board meeting. Of course, again, approving bond or capital funding is our long-term response. We'd like to reduce our maximum age of buses for both route and trip buses. Historically, it's been an average of 10 to 12 years, but half of them were above 12 years, and some of them were 16 and 17 years old, and historically, the trip buses that are used for extracurricular activity were the old route buses that just were moved over there. And so, based on what we've experienced with our teams and fine arts getting around during these summer months, as the programs were kicking off, we were doing a lot of trips out of town and didn't have a lot of buses available. So I think from a long-term perspective, we should look at changing that and maxing it out at a not to exceed 12 years of any bus, so that we can make sure it's the best quality and condition. Prioritize and order HVAC equipment, which again is part of that reimbursement resolution discussion, and then go ahead and order buses based on that revised plan. And in that case, it would also be under a reimbursement resolution. So today's recommendation is to approve the use of capital projects funds, and I put in parentheses capital and contingency of $750,000 for critical infrastructure project. And the reason I put that in there is because these are not this is not replacing the equipment. This is just repairing it and getting it operational and keeping it operational until we can replace it, which is when we would utilize bond money to do that. The future recommendation being consider approval of reimbursement resolutions to utilize future bond funds to complete critical infrastructure projects and bus purchases, which would basically be we're spending $50,000 to repair a chiller that's slated for replacement. The reimbursement resolution would allow us to order the replacement unit, and today's recommendation will allow us to repair that without overtaxing Ed's department budget that's really not designed to replace and repair at that level. So those are our recommendations and what we're looking to do for the September regular board.
Thank you, Paul.
And so maybe just to make sure I kind of understand the moving pieces here with this recommendation, today we are going to propose the $750,000 just for repairs. For the future recommendation, is it basically, should the bond pass in November, we would go ahead and start approving projects to be done out of capital and contingency so that later on we could, like once the bonds actually sell, we could reimburse that funding from the bond fund?
The mechanics of how that happens is how we've historically done it. Because the board is doing a reimbursement resolution, we go ahead and set up the fund that we would establish for a 2023 bond if it would have passed. And we post those in there. We utilize capital and contingency cash to issue the purchase orders and get the product and the equipment ordered. If the bond were to fail, we would have to transfer those and move them over to capital and contingency or existing bond savings and interest. If the bond passes, it's in the right fund already.
Okay, so we're looking at doing that before November.
That's what the reimbursement resolution is intended to do. It allows us to order items that are long lead in anticipation of it, but the risk is that if the bond were to fail, we have just committed to spending money out of other funding sources, right? Of course, Alice and I were kind of talking through this. It just means what we've been doing for the last eight or 9 months is really holding off as much as possible, but the risk of that is becoming very apparent, what it could mean for us, especially when you have this old equipment that's getting hammered by 103, 104 every day. It's really hard on the equipment, and it shows. We're seeing the impact of it. So I think even though mechanically that's how that would work, we would still have to replace those chillers because we're going to have to keep those. If we were to wait until next year to even order them, and you're talking about another year and a couple of months after that, and entering into another school year with the chillers we had this year, it's already going to be a challenge.
That makes sense.
Any other questions?
Not so much a question, just a comment. I see Fred and I see Ed, missing Dwayne, of course, but he's probably still working. Oh, I'm sorry, Dwayne.
I'm blocking you.
But I wanted to thank each and every one of you guys. When we look at, we've already talked about it before, maintenance being down, 60 people since 2014 when we had to make some cuts back then. Fred hearing down 50 kitchen workers, and we've actually exceeded the amount of meals that we're providing to students. And Dwayne, I know because we talked about it at our last meeting, typically, a lot of our buses don't necessarily have the mileage, but most folks don't know that the idle time and the stop and go is actually harder than, getting on the interstate and actually putting miles on the bus. So we're starting to see them fail and trying to get parts for a 16-year-old. As I was explaining it to a neighbor the other day, that's like trying to get parts for a 64 Mustang, not readily available, specialty parts, not a lot of people are going to have them, etc. Ed, thanks to you and your department for what you're doing. I know I've reached out to you, we've talked at length, and I know, just the little things that you're doing in your department, I don't think a lot of people recognize. And I'm just going to highlight this. I brought to you an issue, and in order to take care of that issue, I think you sent one of your guys home early on a Friday so he could go to work on Saturday while the building was empty and fumigate and exterminate the building. So those are things that when we talk about the sacrifices that people are making, hearing there's a couple drivers that we have to, attend to that are coming in off of routes because they're so warm, and they're doing an elementary, then an intermediate, then a high school, then a elementary, then an intermediate route. So they're in some of those buses. So we cannot thank our personnel enough for what they're doing. It just so happens we're going through an exceptionally unique period of time where we really haven't experienced this type of heat and the stresses that it puts on people, equipment, etc. So while you guys were in the audience, I just wanted to recognize, and I don't know if those at home who are tuning in can see you guys, but thank you to your departments for what you guys are doing, because we're able to have school. So, if you're ready for a recommendation, if nobody has anything else, I'm ready to make it.
Give me just one moment. I'm going to echo what Mr. Cunningham said. I do want to thank everybody who has been going above and beyond. As we've received phone calls and emails and text messages of thermostats in classrooms that exceed what any of us would want to work in, and temperatures in buses that even if they're shorter runs, that the driver doesn't get off the bus, and so the run is still a longer run. And so I think focusing on our people, focusing on their safety and their health remains really, really important. And so when you bring this forward to us, Paul, I know it's not just to do it. It's because we've reached a point where the age of the infrastructure and the level of obsolescence has really exceeded its life cycle. We're good at extending as long as we can, but definitely it's having an impact on instruction. It's having an impact on students and on teachers. I'm thankful for the messages and for the feedback that we've received. People are sometimes surprised because they're not the happiest of messages and emails, but without that insight, it doesn't give us the ability to really understand the impact that it's having day to day. And so I think it's important, and I appreciate your presentation that really puts into context that this is beyond a single campus, it's beyond a single classroom, it's beyond a single facility. We're really talking about some things that are pretty widespread at a scale that exceeds what we can do to really address this based on how we normally would on a daily basis. And so I thank you for bringing it forward. I do want to thank transportation and maintenance and our child nutrition workers, custodial staff and SLOs who are continuing to kind of navigate the start of the school year in slightly different conditions and making sure those conditions are cool is extremely important for us, and I know it is for you all as well. And so I thank you for bringing it forward. I do think it's also important to note that what we're talking about, and I know you mentioned this, Paul, is to address still temporarily until we can do replacements, but I think it's also with the mindset that when it gets hot again, as hot as it's been, and let's hope that maybe we don't continue to see consecutive 100-day temperatures, but in the spring and in the, going into the summer, that the things that we've done will hopefully address more of these challenges that are becoming so problematic for us. I think that's part of what we're also trying to do in this process.
It is. It's hard to really project too far into the future with this equipment, ultimately. But at that time, we would go into the summer with the expectation that we probably need to hire contractors to come back in and do a reevaluation. And so depending on the timing of that and what we find out with the additional equipment, we may be able to utilize the existing project funds to do that rather than coming back for an additional request. But it really depends on what it is. So if we feel confident that we can carry those into the new school year, assuming the lead times are beyond that, then we'll go through that rather than continuing to push money after something we know is going to be replaced. But the critical thing is to make sure that the systems are operational as much as we can. We just obviously fear something where we can't fix it, and then we may be in the position of needing to rent chillers, which, as we saw at Springs, is pretty expensive and difficult to undertake. But we're ready to do that if we need to.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Mr. Cunningham.
Mr. President, I move that the board approve the superintendent's recommendation for the use of capital project funds of $750,000 for critical infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor, if you'll please raise your hand. The vote's unanimous. Thank you. Thanks to the board. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Next item on the agenda is for information and discussion, and it's Vader and bond overview.
It's a pretty good segue from what we were just talking about. And so Ms. Benzai is really going to share this presentation, and it summarizes information on the voter approved tax rate election, Proposition A that will be on the ballot in November, as well as bond propositions B and C. And those will all, everything will be, as you know, you've voted for that. So this presentation that she's going to share is being shared in the campus open houses, at community meetings, and it's just information that we want to make sure that you have. So as we move forward, we always remind everyone, Clear Creek ISD is home to 40,000 students, a little over that as of today, and 5,000 employees. And we're very proud to offer the quality education and neat programs which allow our children to reach their highest potential. And we're grounded in our promise, as always, to this community to help children achieve, contribute, and lead with integrity in a safe and nurturing environment surrounded by a spirit of exploration. And however, we are at a financial crossroads, which is why you will see the 3 propositions on the ballot in November.
Okay, a little financial housekeeping to begin. We have 3 accounts, essentially like you do at home. We have our checking account, which is used to pay our monthly bills like electricity, property insurance, fuel, for us, our salaries, and other day-to-day operational costs. We have our savings account, which is really determined by how much we can pay from our checking account. And we have our debt account, and this is how we pay our school bond debt. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on our checking account in school speak, that is our general fund. And this fund is regulated by state law. By state law, we are allocated $6,160 per student, and the percentage of that total amount is determined by the percentage of time students attend school on average. This per student allotment pays for salaries, school safety, utilities, fuel, and property insurance. That basic allotment has not increased since 2019, and while we were hopeful that the legislature would have increased it during this past session, they did not. As you know from home, inflation's had an impact on our ability to balance a budget. For example, our general insurance policies, such as for windstorm and property, have gone up 81% since 2019. So really there's 4 factors that have come into play in our financial outlook. First, the basic allotment has not increased since 2019. Second, our student enrollment numbers are not growing the way they used to be, and we are seeing an enrollment decline. Third, student attendance, which is improving, but we have not fully recovered to pre-pandemic levels of an average of 95%, which means we are not receiving that full basic allotment per student. And fourth, inflation. Currently, Clear Creek ISD has the 2nd lowest tax rate for operations in the greater Houston area and the 4th lowest in the state. As you can see, your tax rate has gone down year after year. This is our financial outlook under these 4 conditions. As you can see, for the last 2 years, we've been pulling from our savings account to balance the budget. In this past school year, we pulled more than $9 million. There is not enough in the savings account to continue to balance the budget in future years. And for this fiscal year, we're facing a $17 million deficit and a $31 million deficit the following year. So this financial picture was analyzed by our strategic budget sprint team, which consisted of school board members, business leaders, parents, students, and educators. In lieu of significant budget reductions, such as reducing staff and student programs and increasing class size, the budget sprint team recommended that CCISD seek voter authorization for a tax rate increase to pay for daily operations. For the first time in Clear Creek ISD history, we will be asking voters to consider a 3-cent tax rate increase on the operations tax rate to balance the budget. These 3 pennies are called golden pennies because each one comes with up to 80% matching state funds, and all those funds stay local. This November, the state is also seeking voter authorization to increase the homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000, which is great news for our taxpayers. Additionally, the legislature passed historic property tax relief bill, which will result in a 17-cent tax rate decrease for Clear Creek ISD homeowners. Although it is essentially a tax rate increase, Clear Creek ISD is asking voters to consider sharing of those 3 of those 17 cents back with the district to balance the budget. On November 7th, voters will see Proposition A on the ballot. This is to seek voter authorization for those 3 pennies. If it passes, your tax rate will be reduced by 14 cents. As a tax impact, it adds up to approximately $80 less in that property tax relief savings on a home valued at $385,000. It will allow us to balance the budget. If Proposition A fails, taxpayers will see the full 17 cents property tax rate cut, which will equate to approximately $750 savings on a home valued at $385,000. We will need to have a larger conversation on how to reduce $31 million from the budget. And to put this into perspective, in 2011, when the state reduced funding to public education, Clear Creek ISD lost about $17 million, which resulted in the loss of 130 positions through attrition. So now I'd like to move over to the other side of the tax rate, and this is the one we use to pay off our long-term debt from school bonds. The last school bond program we had was held in 2017, and I'm proud to say that the 2 last schools to be renovated are complete and opened this year. There are no major renovations on the November 7th ballot. We have 2 propositions for voters to consider. Proposition B is a $265 million bond to fund priority repairs and replace things like roofs, chillers, surveillance cameras, secure vestibules, life safety equipment, and school buses. Each campus would receive funds under this proposal. The bond would expand our cybersecurity capabilities and further protect student information from malware. It would replace athletic and fine arts equipment and expand the East Ag facility to meet program demand for more pens. Proposition C is a $37 million instructional technology bond. By law, instructional technology must be on its own proposition. This would fund the continuation of our one-to-one program where students in grade 2 through 12 receive a laptop. It will also fund assistive technology for students with special needs and projectors for classrooms. Both Proposition B and C will not result in a tax rate increase. We can fund these projects through the existing bond tax rate of 27 cents. And for Proposition A, B, and C, homeowners 65 and older would not see a tax impact. Proposition A would result in approximately an $80 reduction of that historic property tax rate relief bill and no other tax rate increase for the bond propositions. In conclusion, Proposition A is funding for the daily operations of the district, and Proposition B and C is to fund major capital projects. To learn more about Propositions A through C, including what bond projects are for your school, you can scan this QR code or visit www.ccisd.net/electioncentral. Be an informed voter and go to the polls on November 7th. The last day to register to vote is October 10th.
And that concludes the presentation that we have that is being made to all the campuses. And I know this is familiar information, but really important to see what we're sharing, and then open to any questions that you have.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Was that the information that we were given? Okay. Thank you.
Ready to share.
Yes. Ready to see.
Okay. Could you talk just a little bit, Dr. Engel, about the plans to get this information out and the groups and organizations that are already lined up that we're going to be sharing this with?
Absolutely, and Ms. Paulson may be able to help me with that a little bit, but we are getting many groups on the calendar. We've already talked to the CCCC, the Council of PTAs for the district, and shared this information and received feedback on that. And I know Trustee Cheka was there, so as we start to go out and share information, I think we have a meeting tomorrow night, Rotary next week, so multiple organizations as we go out and just share this with the community. So we encourage everyone. These are facts. This is information that we have put together and wanted to make sure that everyone had the same information. Do you want to share anything else?
We're already on schedule to go to all 3 Rotary clubs, our chambers of commerce, presented at the case group last week, and every campus is having a meeting. We'll also have district level meetings starting next week. And Dr. Engel video recorded this exact message, so we'll be able to get that out to, so for example, the League City Homeowners Association, which is pretty large, they don't meet within our window of time, but they will share that video out so that we'll be able to get that out to taxpayers across League City.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just to clarify, the campus level meetings, those are staff and faculty only, right?
No, we are having open house. So at the open house meetings where parents come, it's an optional time. Obviously, the parents aren't required to come, but we've already had at the secondary and elementary both. How many, do y'all know how many meetings you've had? Secondaries, probably 5, 6? Five or six already. So, but that is open to parents when they do schedule they get to go to the classes and meet the teachers, kind of meet the teacher, and we're providing that presentation at that time. And then we'll also go around the campuses with the staff. And we'll share that with staff and have staff can ask any questions just as this opportunity to. And then at that time, whatever is on the bond for that particular campus, then that information is shared specifically.
And I can say that I went to Springs, and walked my senior schedule, and they had the presentation before, open house, and it was packed. The auditorium was packed.
That's great. If folks are interested in requesting that a presentation be made to a group or organization, is that also through the website?
Yes, there is a form online that if there's an organization that would like us to come and present. We've received one so far, so we will go anywhere two or more are gathered.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the TEA accountability overview and update on A through F accountability system.
Okay, and Dr. Henley is going to share this information with us. It is really the A through F accountability system, and she is our expert in residence and is going to do it's a challenging job to explain this, and she is ready for that, and then any questions that you might have.
So like Dr. Engel, so thank you for your time. But like Dr. Engel mentioned, it is a complex system, and TEA doesn't always provide us all of the information at one time. So I'll do my best to give you an overview of it, walk you through it to the best of my ability, and answer the questions that you have. So, like in the past with accountability, they've done a few updates for 23. So 23 accountability was our 23 tests that we've taken in spring of 23 that we still don't have the full accountability manual yet from TEA on how they're actually scoring us completely. That's supposed to come out in the next couple of weeks, around the same time that ratings appear. But like in the past that we've had for the last few years, nothing really changed as far as STAR is still the predominant factor in it. So we still have STAR performance in these grade levels. Then we have growth in reading and math at those particular grade levels. TELPAS is in our accountability system at those grade levels. And then high schools have our graduation, which is really, we call it an outer school because that's our former kids. So that's just same playbook, just different rules now. So STAR performance indicators, as we work through it, that is the number of kids that score at the state's designated approach level, meets level, and master's level. We have STAR growth, which talks about the different points that we get for them to hit levels from one year to the next. So if they show the year's growth at the master's, we get 1, we get half points if you maintain, and now we get extra bonus points for kids that failed the prior year that now pass in reading and math. TELPAS is a little hard to define. Again, the state has indicated at one point that in the past it was composite score. Now they're going to 2 of the 3 domains, and now they're thinking of adding the writing domain in, so now it's the best 2 out of 4. So just a little clarity on that coming in the future. But while we're also having a change in accountability, this year we also had STAR redesign, so we have different types of items that the kids were tested over throughout the assessment, as well as different scoring. So it used to be 1 point, now some of them are multi-point. They added back a writing component in grades 3 through 8, revising, editing, extended construction response is what they call it. They added some growth measures from year to year that we have not had in the past, such as grade 8 reading to grade 9 out English 1 end of course, as well as if I took a Spanish test to an English test. But what TA has done moving forward is change the scaling and raise the bar a little bit in certain areas. And so we're going to see a little bit different measurement as we move forward. Just an example, just of a hotspot example, this would be one of the kids. They would have to select which 2 examples of the image demonstrate inherited traits. The kids actually have to circle with their mouse. So in this case, they would circle a chicken clucking and a mouse blending. This is a 5th grade science question. TELPAS. So in the past, TELPAS was done with teacher scoring. We calibrated, we had training for them. It was done with writing portfolio sample that were collected from students throughout the year. And so it would be gathered from different classrooms and authentic embedded in content. So if they were in the science and they were writing about science, we would grab that writing sample. TE changed it to a completely online assessment that the child logs into the system and completes. And so those samples are now scored by TEA instead of the teachers that are trained. They're now generic prompts that may or may not be tied to what content they were currently working in. They've added revising and editing And in the past, we've gotten those TELPAS responses from TEA, and at this time, they are not releasing those yet. So we don't know when that's possibly coming.
I know you're in the middle of your presentation, but
That's okay.
is that done through AI? Because I know it used to be done, or is it a committee that is evaluating those?
TEA
Although
says
it's
they
online, is it?
Right, TEA says that they hire people to score these.
Okay.
All right, the biggest changes with accountability in the state is going to be really the scaling measurement of CCMR, which is our college, career, military readiness, as well as graduation rates. So like in the past, though, these are our former graduates. So in 23's accountability, these are our 22 graduates. They have gone off and been out almost a year before over a year and a half before we'll even be held to their accountability. But like we've talked in the past, college readiness is those criterias for AP exams, SAT, ACT, completed dual credit courses, you're graduating under an advanced diploma, that's our special education students. Career readiness is our industry-based certifications after completing that program of study. And then military readiness is just enrolling in the armed forces. So while those three components have remained the same, the way they are scaling that will look differently when 23's accountability measures come out. All right, same buckets that Ms. Benzai talked about. TEA has buckets as well. We have the 3 buckets of Domain 1, which are student achievement, Domain 2, which they call school progress, and Domain 3, which is closing the gaps. So Domain 1 is just your performance overall on STAR. Domain 2 is your performance on STAR measured 2 different ways, growth and then your relative performance, comparing you to like schools with the same percentage of economically disadvantaged students. And then Domain 3 takes the same STAR score, applies a higher caliber of standard to it, as well as this is where TELPAS or graduation or for high school CCMR come in as well. So I'll briefly go over just example data. This is not current CCISD data. This is just easy calculation methodology. You'll notice 2 things on this slide. First off, there's 2 different groups. You have elementary and intermediate because their measurement for STAR performance or student 1 domain, student achievement, is just STAR. High schools, you have STAR, you have your college, career, military indicator, and you have graduation. So we're going to notice same percentages of approaches, same percentages of meets, and same percentages of masters, which all adds up to 150%. Divide that by 3, because there's 3 categories, and that's where that 50 STAR average comes in. Then TEA does what they call scaling. So they take the average and scale it across the state, essentially, and that scaling, that 50 then becomes a 77 for elementary, an 81 for intermediate, and so their A, B, or C score would be a C or a B for elementary with the same percentages of passing for STAR. High school, we have to go a different route because we're going to add in CCMR graduation. So that same 50 scales to a 77, but CCMR, so if we have a campus that has a CCMR rating of 60%, that is actually going to scale to a 67. Prior to 23, so prior to what's coming out in 22, that same 60 would have been a 90. This is where we're going to see the biggest differences across the state. Then you have graduation rate, 95%. That scales to a 75 in the new accountability system. In the past, that 95, again, prior to 23, would have scaled to an 85. So there's the difference that we're going to see with high schools and CCMR and graduation rates in Domain 1. So then 44%, 40%, 20% gives you a 71C for that high school campus in Domain 1. Okay, so again, that scaling 90 and 85. So now Domain 2 has 2 areas. The first area that they look at is what we call student growth. The second area they rate us on or compare us to is relative performance. Student growth is the measurement of the student's first STAR test the prior year, so STAR tested in 21, and did they grow to STAR in 23 for both math and or reading. Relative performance is your comparison of STAR performance and your percentage of economically disadvantaged students on a sliding scale, and they scale you down and give us a score. That's the simplest way to explain that. So for example, again, not CCISD data, but we just took some numbers. There would be points if we saw for growth. For every master's, we get a point. We have the number of maintenance points. That means they stayed at their same approaches meets master's level. And then we have the none. We do get bonus points for every they call them accelerated testers. For every student that didn't pass the prior year and grows to pass, we get 0.25 for that kid. So they're a little bit of a boost. Take all the possible points earned, divide it by the total number of possible points. That gives you a percentage, and then TEA scales that. And there's the scaling difference between elementary and intermediate and high school. And then, so now relative performance. To look at this one, we have to know the economically disadvantaged percentage rate for each campus. And again, same STAR performance. You're going to see elementary and intermediate a little bit different than high school. So same STAR average of 50. That scales at I went ahead and used for elementary a 70% eco-disc rate and got an 83B for elementary and 88B for intermediate. High schools, you're adding in CCMR. They don't have graduation in this one, but they add CCMR in. Again, the scaling percent for this one was 40% to give them a 71C. So that's the first two domains. And graduation is not included in that calculation. So now when we talk of back to the three buckets, now they take the best of the first two buckets, and that's what's going to be 70% of our overall rating for each campus. And so in this case, we look at domain 2, we decide which one's better between growth or relative performance. In this case, it's going to be growth. And then we look between that score and domain 1 and we say which one's better. And in this case, it's the 77 domain 1. So this campus, domain 1, student achievement would be their number one, 70% of their overall rating. Okay, now we get into closing the gaps. This one has significantly changed for everyone in the state. And so this one, I don't actually have numerical examples because we don't know all the, again, like I explained, TA hasn't given us all the data pieces to even begin to try to calculate something. But I can tell you, in the past, we had 14 student groups. That was our breakdown of our ethnicities, our racial group, our special education students, our EB students. We had 4 weighted components. A little bit different for elementary, intermediate, and high schools. You'll see we have, again, STAR performance. We have their growth. For high schools, it's just CCMR. We have TELPAS, so that's where the TELPAS assessment comes into place. And then for elementaries, it's STAR average. This is where we have math and, social studies and science included. And then high school graduation rate. It used to be a yes, no. It was a 0 or 1. You either met this standard or you didn't. And so the state said this, again, different for high schools. Now in 23, we have 4 student groups that we're going to focus on mainly. Still the same 4 weighted components, but now we're on a tiered level of 0 to 4 in the calculation of the score. And we're focusing on all students in those 4 categories, the 2 lowest performing groups, and those are calculated by the state based on their 22 performance prior year, and then what they call a high focus group. And that high focus group are our economically disadvantaged students, our special ed students, and our emergent bilingual students, as well as our highly mobile students, all compressed into one category. And so, again, this is the one where it's a little trickier to get the data because we just don't know exactly the subgroups that they're going to go. Big changes in domain 3, though, that were campuses in the past, you had to have 25 or more kids in that demographic group to be calculated. Now we're at 10. So most of our student groups across CCISD for most campuses now will be calculated within this closing the gaps domain. Again, that maximum group went from 14 to 4, so we're taking a bunch and condensing them down. And then that interim target of 0 to 4. And the TA's provided some guidance on that. So if I were to give you sample data, this would then be 30% of their score. So this campus overall rating would be a 75C. So as we move forward, big overall summary of accountability changes. That major scaling changes for CCMR for high schools across the state, not just CCISD, but those are retroactive scores. Those are graduation rates and from kids that graduated in 22. We did get the STAR growth measures changing a little bit, additional tests that are now added in growth, as well as the bonus points. TELPAS were still to be determined. And then the biggest thing for a district rating. So in the past, we had our own independent rating based on some of the same criteria, but a little bit different. Now we are a weighted average. So CCISD's district average is weighted from all of our campuses combined based on their enrollment. So campuses that have a higher enrollment, grades 3 through 12, will weigh higher in the district's overall score than a lower enrollment, which means our high schools for a district our size are the biggest impact on our overall A through F. That's the biggest change with accountability, in my opinion. So this slide came from TEA, and this is actually Commissioner Morath's own words. So 22 ratings and 23 ratings are both using different methodologies, which I gave you a small, brief glimpse into the world. There's a different set of rules for A through F. We cannot compare them side by side. It is possible, and we will see this, that we saw campuses, I believe, that we will see campuses that performed better than their previous year, had more students at approaches, meets, and masters that will drop a whole letter grade based on this new system. It is not an apples to apples comparison, and that was actually Commissioner Morath's own words. So that is accountability in a nutshell. So what questions do you have?
I got a question. Alice, did we lose you? Admit it.
It's very confusing. I'll stick with school finance.
I'll stick with this, we're good.
And I just wanted to ask that question because if the accountant that deals with numbers and formulas can't keep up, right? So, I appreciate your candor and your honesty.
They lost me at scaling.
Mr. Bowen?
Yeah, and that was kind of what I was wondering, is like it actually, I think I actually understand what they're trying to do. And because the criticism of A to F ratings is always, if you just look at STAR scores and you look at how many students do well, how many students do poorly, and that's all you look at, then you're just going to end up with the wealthy schools with a lot of parental support getting A's, schools that have more challenges getting F's, and so I get that they're like all of these complications of the formula are then trying to balance that out and offer different pathways to, well, if your school improved a lot, even if they started off in a bad spot and got better, then they get more points. So I get what they're trying to do, and then ultimately it makes the formula so complicated that you can't really use it to honestly evaluate anything anymore. But what I was wondering about was the scaling. So if you go back to that slide, maybe just one of the slides for one of the for the achievement domain.
Yes, that one's the easiest. Look at there.
Well, I think this applies to a lot of the different metrics. So how do we get from a STAR average of 50 to a TEA scaling? Are they putting all of the campuses kind of on a bell curve and then assigning a score?
Yes.
Okay, that is what bothers me about this system, is that it's not possible for every school in the state to pass.
Correct.
Because of the way they're scaling, some of the schools are destined to fail, and some of the schools are destined to make A's, because they're not just saying, here's the bar and you've got to clear it. They're putting everybody on a curve and grading you on the curve. And that's really the core issue here, is it's not necessarily the complicatedness of the formula, because it is complicated, But if you had a system where it's possible for everybody to pass, then they would. But it seems like the bar isn't fixed. The bar moves based on how everybody in the state does. And so that to me is what's really wrong with this system. Now, the flip side of it though, is if we had a system where it was a lot simpler and you gave everybody a test and you graded the schools based on the percentage of how many passed, which is what it used to be. I mean, I remember back in the really old days of the TOS test, and that became TAX. Like that was the one we would always take, and the number that went home at the end of every year was what is the percentage of the students in your school who passed, and then they had a few demographic groups, and that used to be a very clear metric. Like your third grade class had 98% of students pass. Your third grade class had 75% pass. And if you look at that school, this hypothetical school, a 77 for an elementary school, not great, not horrendous. That's C stands for credit. You've got 45% of the students actually meeting the standard. And if we really believe that that is the standard, then that's appalling. I mean, I don't know. It seems like this formula is designed to get schools that are passing students along who clearly have not mastered the subject matter and still find a way to make the school pass. And I think that's kind of unfair from a statewide perspective to districts that are doing the right things. So if you have a lot of districts that are doing the right things, but then you have a formula set up to get as many other schools as possible up to the same level, even though they're not graduating nearly as many students who have mastered the skills that they're supposed to, then that's also an unfair system. So I mean, there are a lot of problems with this. But I think we have to look at both sides. I mean, if we have test results that are showing that lots of students aren't meeting the grade level standards, then we need to be concerned about that. And so, obviously, I'm going to be very interested in what our test results show. I'm still a big advocate of finding ways of gathering data about student achievement that isn't connected to the STAR test and is nationally normed. And I think those are options that we need to develop, and I think other districts have made work well. I've read a lot about, and I've seen other districts implement measures of academic progress, which is very highly regarded. I know there are nationally normed tests also that can be used to give a more realistic sense of what students are actually learning, and they're not as burdensome as STAR is. And so I encourage us not to just come across as complaining about STAR, even though there is a lot to complain about. But I think we need to find alternatives that work for us better, even if the state isn't letting us take credit for them yet. We still do need to find honest assessments of how our students are doing and not just depend on STAR to let us know if we're meeting our targets.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other comments or questions?
Well, I said this years ago, I'd like to see us move, even if it's not as a district, as a state, to like the NEA or something more widely recognized and that is more relevant, I think, to our students. So I agree with you, Mr. Bowen, that the emphasis on STAR, you know, I hate to say it, there's a reason why the state is probably at the bottom half of, you know, academic achievement when you use STAR. So just my 2 cents, but thank you for your presentation and making calculus seem like addition. You did a heck of a job.
It's fun. It's a challenge.
So
Thank
greatly
you.
appreciated.
Any other comments or questions?
I'll just mention this. You had asked earlier about the Vader and the bond going out to the community and everything. And, you know, it would be nice, I think, if the opportunities were out there to, you know, let the public know. And even if it's to the detail that you just described, because it'll blow their mind. You know, people react whenever they hear you have a B rating or B minus or a C plus. People react and say, oh, well, this district's better because they have a B plus and you only have a B minus. They don't understand how this stuff goes in, you know, and I mean, it's very complicated. It really is, you know, so if there's opportunities in the future to just get out there and let the public know that, I mean, it's not a simple system that's just based off of star testing, you know, and our district tries very hard to have the highest rating possible. And I just don't think people realize how complicated that system really is.
Thank you, Mr. Cottrell. Any other comments?
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. I mean, the reason the system is so complicated is not to take succeeding schools, not necessarily to take succeeding schools and make them score lower than they really would. It's also to take for political reasons, take schools that really should be making B's and F's, and most parents with the means to avoid it don't send their kids to those schools, not necessarily in our district, but just statewide, and find a way to get them a higher grade than maybe they would really earn if it were just test scores and nothing else. And so I think there's the more politics is affecting the formula, kind of from both ends, the less credible it becomes. And I think what you see up there is kind of the result of lots of pressure for some schools not to be rated as low as they deserve, and for other schools not to be rated as high as they deserve. And so it undermines the credibility of the system.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph.
Nope.
Any other comments or questions? I'll echo what was said. I do think the element of politics that's entered into a system that already wasn't an accurate reflection of the learning and instruction that's happening across many districts across the state, I think to me is probably the biggest challenge that we face. And so we can navigate around complex formulas and we can understand what the larger intent is, but if what we started with was a game that shouldn't be getting played with students and with instruction, I think that it doesn't matter how we explain it, how we understand it, how we share it. I think it's broken to begin with. And so I'm thankful that we are from a district that focuses on options and provides students learning opportunities that is varied beyond what would ever be measured in one exam. I'm thankful that we provide students choice and that allows them to pursue different pathways that may be focused in fine arts, that may be focused in science and math, that allows them to explore options in CTE that extends beyond what would ever show up in a STAR test. And so I think for all of that, I do appreciate your explanation and helping us navigate this. I do think at the end of the day, what we can't control is whatever the letter is going to be on a system that was updated after the game was played. And so I think how we lead with that and how we explain that is really critical, because what shouldn't get lost is our commitment to students and to learning. And I think that's reflected in the varied options that we provide. And so despite a system that hasn't provided the funding that's required, despite the fact that we would pursue a VADR that we've never pursued before as a district, despite the fact that bonds are part of how we thrive as a public education system, with people at the core and students who are demonstrating the results of that, I think we should stay focused on that. And the state will do what the state will do. And I think it's a perfect example of local control and our local focus on what matters most, and it's people in our district. Mr. Cunningham.
Mr. President, since you and Trustee Cottrell highlighted, explaining our ratings, it just makes our community-based accountability report that much more important to highlight the exceptional things that our district does on a day in, day out basis, whether it's building airplanes, whether it's award-winning robotics programs, you name it. There's a lot of things that this accountability system doesn't take into account the exceptional talents, the exceptional, abilities that our kids have, and more importantly, the teaching and instruction that's going into helping our students realize these talents. So I would say that if anything, this highlights that most districts need to get on board and get their own community-based accountability reports so they can explain to their constituents, what a fantastic job that their districts are doing. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you.
I was like, yes.
A choir of one, but you have lots of backup singers. Well, thank you all very much to the board. Thank you for your questions and comments this afternoon. Dr. Engel, thank you for your continued focus on why we're here. And thank you to all of Cabinet and staff that continue to take us forward. So with no further business before the board, we'll adjourn at 6:12 p.m.
So is this when we make a motion to do away with the interrupt system? CCI stuff? I had to wait for that.